Inequality. Whose responsibility is it? 2014 marks the 50th anniversary of the War on Poverty in the United States. Yet the gap between the wealthy and the poor continues to widen, leading to the broader concern of inequality and how it actually plays out in society. Newman presents a myth that justifies economic disadvantage and social inequality, stating, "People are poor or near poor because they either don't work hard enough, don't care, or lack the skills and abilities to get ahead." In response to this myth, by looking at the three areas mentioned above, how hard one works, attitude toward work, and skill and ability, we can evaluate the validity of this statement. Work ethic. In 2007, after 10 years of debate, Congress finally approved a measure to increase minimum wage from $5.15 an hour to $7.25 an hour. The official poverty line for a family of four is $22,162 a year. This figure is computed using outdated assumptions about people's spending patterns and is likely set too low, rendering them ineligible for certain types of assistance that are greatly needed. Nowhere in the United States does a full-time minimum wage job provide enough income to provide adequate housing. As illustrated, some states like Hawaii, California, and New York, a household needs at least 3 minimum wage incomes. The outcomes are insufficient. Inequality increases as economic segregation occurs, according to Neckerman and Torch. Regarding the homeless, nearly 3/4 of homeless families cite lack of affordable housing as the principal cause of their homelessness. And according to the federal government, housing is considered affordable if it costs 30% of a family's income. Yet the poorest 20% of income earners spend 78% of their wages on housing. Attitude. From the social psychological perspective, this emphasizes the implications of inequality for perceptions of relative deprivation, which may lead to frustration and hostility. For example, more than 2/3 of low-income people work. They work frequently long hours, sometimes in more than one job, often sacrificing other aspects of their lives, like family, education, and recreation, all in the interest of economic survival. And after years of disappointment and working hard to barely get by, they either give up the dream of the economic comfort or slip back into poverty and government assistance. Skill level. There is extensive evidence of the relationship between family income and school outcomes. 2011 statistics show individuals with bachelor degrees or higher. According to Newman, below are some of the statistics. 52.3% of Asian Americans hold degrees and yet have an unemployment rate of 7.1%, while non-Hispanic whites, 29.9% hold degrees, with an 8.4% of white students dropping out of high school, with an overall unemployment rate of 8.3%. For the African American culture, 19.3% hold degrees, with 11% of black students dropping out of high school, an unemployment rate of 15.5%, and 17% earning minimum wage. And finally, Latinos, 13.2% hold degrees, with almost 20% of Latino students dropping out of high school, an unemployment rate of 11.9%, and 18.7% earning minimum wage. The U.S. Bureau of the Census defines 13 million people who earn up to 25% more than the official poverty line amount as near poor or working poor. As a result, they escape most academic attention and help. The disappearance of work in inner-city enclaves is more a matter of structural consequences of broad trends such as deindustrialization and economic globalization, which is locating businesses and manufacturing facilities elsewhere. And due to the changing role of technology, this has also been a factor explaining the emphasis on the value of education and skill and a widening gap of residual inequality. Elderly and children. In addition to the above racial and class particulars, two additional groups that need mentioning in the fallout of inequality includes the elderly and children. According to Hillier and Barrow, in 2008, 36 million people were over the age of 65 in the United States, which is about 12% of the entire population. Today, those aged 85 and older are the fastest growing segment of the population, and the group turning 100 years and older has grown from 32,000 in 1980 to 53,000 in 2010 in the U.S. alone. With such astounding figures and concerns for elderly care rising, one would anticipate a gloomy horizon, and yet there's a glimmer of light in recent statistics that indicates that when we do align our concern with structural action, a difference can be made. For example, as recently as 1970, 25% of U.S. residents over the age of 65 fell below the poverty line, but today, only 8.9% of the people in this age group are poor, as compared to the national average, which is 14.3%. Both Newman and studies by Kurtzleben indicate a key reason for this drop is Social Security, estimating that without it, 44.4%, not 9% of elderly, would be below the poverty line. While Social Security has come to the aid of the elderly, children's fortunes have gone in the reverse direction. Over 15 million American children under the age of 18 live in households that are officially poor, with figures varying dramatically along ethno-racial lines. We see 34% of African American, 30% Latino, 15% non-Hispanic white, and 14% Asian children under the age of 18 are living in poor households. As Newman points out, getting out of poverty is not simple because it is a complicated condition with multiple causes and multiple consequences. The question we must seriously address, however, is the deeper heart attitude issue, which is posed by Osberg and Smeating, stating that there's a trend over time for American attitudes towards inequality at the top end of the income distribution to become less tolerant of inequality, even as at the bottom end they have become more accepting of inequality. A disturbing conclusion of these findings is that this attitude demonstrates the ability for Americans to have what's called a split consciousness about economic inequality, because the same person often will report support for egalitarian principles, such as distribution according to need, and an egalitarian attitude, such as the moral depravity of the poor. It would be easy to blame the current state on the recent economic recession or previous political administration policies, but the truth is, we must take a deeper look at the attitudes and values as they have developed over the past decade and ask if this is truly the direction we want to be heading. As this gap between the rich and the poor in the United States continues to grow, it challenges the notion that we live in a society where everyone is equally valued. Responsibility. Newman concludes his chapter with the thought, "It's only when we can convince ourselves that people are getting what they deserve that we can ultimately accept or maybe even justify their suffering." An alternative view I suggest, however, is that instead of accepting their suffering, as followers of Christ, knowing we did not get what we deserved, we extend both understanding, compassion, and participation in working toward justice, regardless of, or in spite of, our own needs by caring for the elderly, the widow, the poor, and the needy around us. We cannot escape the teachings of Christ concerning those around us, as well as our part in planning and preparing wisely. With our own families, our neighborhoods, work, and church relationships, we are all faced with the dilemma of caring. Whether from a sociological, economical, or spiritual backdrop, as believers we would be wise to look back at times when the church served as a positive model regarding caring for those needy or those who are different from themselves. Paul offers us a beautiful picture of the church's response in Macedonia, where in a severe test of affliction their abundance of joy and their extreme poverty have overflowed in a wealth of generosity on their part, for they gave according to their means, as I can testify, and beyond their means, of their own free will, begging us for the favor and taking part in the relief of the saints. From 2 Corinthians 8, 2-5. These were not people of means, rather they themselves were experiencing hardship, yet their response was one overflowed in a generosity of wealth, rather than an us versus them mentality. It was a we mentality. What would it look like today if the church responded to the crisis around us in the same manner? Are we begging to be a part of the solution rather than turning a blind eye and looking the other way? As we write our future history, we can take courage in knowing Christ has invited us to participate with Him in being His hands and face to the people in great need of hope and help. As we turn our hearts to envision a future that is both proactive and practical, our response is to be more likely that one that reflects Christ than that of the world.